Right. Can you guys hear us over there?
Yes.
Um,
Oh, okay, so you were that many and then you came here.
My,
Okay.
And John,
all right, well, since we're getting started a little late, I would go ahead and call the meeting to order. About 6:15. So just to see who's here, James O'Toole. Here. Natalie Sayre.
Here.
John Bars is myself, and I'm here. Peter Markey. Here. Brian Casey. Here. Jonathan Winslow. Here. We got an email from Lauren. Unfortunately, she has a stomach bug, so she's not going to be able to make it. And got a couple of vacant positions there. That San Mateo County Agricultural Commissioner Warren Little is present. Farm Bureau Executive Director Jeff Brown here. Do we have UC Co-op Extension representative? I think so. Okay. And San Mateo County Planning Liaison Summer Burleson
here.
Is with us via owl or
Maybe not quite.
Zoom.
Not quite yet for the owl.
Summer, we can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear us.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you guys. You can't hear me?
Can any of you come?
Can you hear me now?
Here.
Hello?
I tried turning it up. Oh, that's 100%.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Do you mind trying out, Summer?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Test, test.
Hello, can you hear me now?
So it's just on my PC.
Oh, it does look like the owl is working. I think on your PC, to change the settings, I don't know if both the settings are changed to the owl device, but it does look like it's working for both the speaker and microphone.
I think so now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay.
Right.
Great.
Okay. I guess we can move on to our item number 3, oral communications to allow the public to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. If your subject is not on the agenda, the chair will recognize you at this time. So that's primarily for members of the public.
And anyone remote can, there should be a raised hand feature.
Ray might want to speak more to it, but tomorrow on the board's agenda, they have an item for Measure K for $1 million earmarked for farm worker housing.
Yeah, I can explain it. So it's actually what the meeting I'm here for in the next room. We're coming out of everything that happened in this past winter. We had applied, the county applied for a CERNA grant at the state. Now, the CERNA grant, it's a $5 million grant, be about 45 to 50 homes. There's a piece of property that's been identified here in Half Moon Bay for that housing development. It's a very interesting grant. The Cerner grant actually is a grant to buy. Where those who qualify can actually purchase their homes and build equity in them. And so the $1 million of Measure K money is the county money up front that's going to be required to go ahead and help prepare that site should we win the Cerner grant. So what's happening tomorrow is we're allocating that money to get ready in anticipation that we're going to be awarded that Cerner grant. And sort of getting everything lined up for that. So what the next meeting that I go into tonight is to meet the neighbors of that property. To go ahead and explain to them that what's coming in are actually really nice, will be really nice housing units. So it's yeah, go ahead.
Who's the property what right now?
City of Half Moon Bay.
Okay.
What's
Yeah.
the spelling of the grant? Sorry,
Cerna is spelled SERNA.
Okay.
So it's a state-run program. There's actually, because of the type of program, there actually aren't that many grant applications from different jurisdictions. So we've talked with the state and we feel pretty confident that we're going to be awarded that grant. And that's a lot of, that's obviously a lot of units that we'll be able to go ahead and take care of. And that'll go ahead and hopefully help everybody as we try to, there's a bunch of different, that's just one of the things we have cooking right now. We have a bunch of different things cooking to try to help ag on the coast.
And how does that trickle down to the farm laborers? When you say they can purchase a home, what do you mean? I don't understand.
So you have to be a farm. So one thing to make clear to you all is you have to actually be a farm worker to qualify for the program. So this isn't a situation where a farm worker is gonna get one of these units and not do farming anymore. To qualify for the Cerner grant program, you have to be a farm worker. And so that basically what will happen is those families will go ahead and be able to move in and then be able to build equity in those homes. The state has a program. There's a companion program where the state actually provides grant funding to people to go ahead and make their down payment. And then over time, the state, that family can go ahead. It's kind of like a piece of equity. There's only so much equity that they can go ahead and obtain from that. The state also takes a piece of that. And so when it comes time to sell, state renews that, next family moves in. But the family takes all that money they were putting in as down payment, they get a piece of it.
Okay.
It'll be required to be in that program to be a resident
Yeah,
in there.
yeah.
It does seem to me like $5 million is not that much money to build 45 units based on just my own efforts to try to build housing. Are you have some other source of funding in addition to that, or you have a way of working some magic?
Well, we have magic.
Yeah.
I mean, but we also have, we have a nonprofit developer who we're moving in, and we have we also have a philanthropic donor. So all of that's coming together to make the project happen.
But you say a philanthropist, is that what you said?
Yeah, philanthropic donor.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, it's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, what would like best case scenario be as far as timeline?
Really,
goes?
it depends. So from a county perspective, it really depends a lot on the city. When the city's ready to go ahead and move forward, we don't control the zoning for it. We don't control the planning. What happens here tonight will probably, and how hard we see pushback from the community may affect that. I don't think too much. I think we'll work with the community and try to mitigate what their concerns are. We're trying to get that $1 million ready to go with the county so that we're ready. We're very serious about trying to get housing built. And then in addition to that, we're very serious about trying to build a co-op distribution center too. So we're trying to get both those things done. Yeah.
And you said the city of Half Moon Bay owns the property?
Yeah.
Where's it located?
You know, I can tell you that by walking into the next room, but it's pretty.
Oh.
So I put out under the door.
What I know it to be is 5 directly behind us.
Oh, really?
That was one property that's been discussed that they would use.
555.
I don't know if it's 5. I don't know which one. There's multiple projects.
Yeah, I mean, it could be another, but that was an acquisition they made that's directly adjacent to this property.
Single housing.
Okay.
I think the 5 Kelly might be a different one. I think there's a senior farm worker project that the city is also working on right now with Sisters of Mercy, who's a developer. That project is specifically for senior farm workers who need extra services.
Which would be great. For that.
Yeah.
Then-
Right. How would be guaranteed that there will always be a farm worker in those houses?
Because it's a CERNA, the program is a CERNA, to qualify for the program, you have to be a farm worker.
Okay.
So the way that the state has set up that program for the allocation of dollars, you have to be. There's no,
So 2-3 years down the road, they decide to get a different type of job out of agriculture.
then they're selling, yeah.
All right.
That's my understanding of the program.
Maybe we don't want it like Blue Ridge.
No.
They usually certify every year and the state actually has to weigh check it out.
Because we lost a lot of housing in Moon Ridge because unfortunately, so many of those residents are not farm labor.
So we're also looking at that. So this isn't the only housing development that we're looking at for farm labor housing. And it will be different. But what we'll do is, because with Moon Ridge, there was supposed to be a certain amount allocated for farm workers and a certain amount allocated for non-farm workers in the second phase. And so we have had discussions with Mid-Penn about that as well.
Okay. That's good.
Any other questions I can answer about that?
One question, or one remark I'd like to make is that we have to come up with some kind of an idea of how many workers we got in this county of farm workers to determine what we're gonna need far as housing goes and far as what's out there already.
Yeah,
So we know, we're talking about building here, building there, but we don't know what really you really need.
yeah.
Until that survey is done, until we get an idea, I think then, then we know what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
But right now, you're kind of shooting in the dark.
Well, so we are doing that survey right now. We're looking at how much farm worker housing exists out there right now. And so as we go out, I know you guys know about that
Yeah.
task force. As that task force goes out, it's assessing how much farm labor housing is out there to begin with at this present time. And as you're doing that, and then that's gonna tell us what we need to actually build.
And
So,
I did ask that be put in the survey since it was going out to all the farms.
yeah,
And so hopefully we can get that
Yeah.
piece of information because it is crucial that we figure out.
I think it's really important.
I'm curious about that survey because we filled it out. We have a farm on 92 and we filled it out, know that we don't have any farm laborers.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, farm labor housing. We never have. Okay, anyway, but then next thing we know, we're getting these phone calls from the task force, even though we said we don't have any, and they still want to come out. And so they're still coming out. So why is that? Is it because, is it a belief issue or what's the reason? Because it just seems like they're allocating resources in a way that is not helpful. You know what I mean, right?
so that we already have uncovered circumstances where people said they didn't have farm worker housing and we found housing. And so they are,
Really?
yeah, so they are doing verifications.
Oh,
So, and it's not, they'll just do it real quick, they'll check it out, but what the
no, I
other
understand.
the other thing that I can share with folks is that. And we just walked out of a task force meeting today. What's happening is they are really, unless there's a serious health and safety issue. They are not causing people to evict. What we're doing right now is they're really trying to take an inventory, as they go on to properties, they're really trying to take an inventory. Of what all the different issues are, because more than likely, we're gonna be changing some of our county regulations. To try to make it easier for people, and so this is a discovery process that's taking place right now. What may happen when they go onto a site, is they may say, look, there are some issues here that we're gonna need to address right now, so that we don't have to move people out. We've had a couple instances where there were some concerns about fire and things like that, where they said, hey, you can't park a car here, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. And they'll go through that with the property owner, but the real goal and objective right now is to stabilize what current housing there is present. And then really create that inventory within the county of, okay, how do we go ahead and facilitate this better on our end, working with the different property owners. At the same time, we're doing all of that, we're also trying to build our inventory of farm worker housing that if the property owner says, this isn't gonna work, I can't make this work, we can find some place to move people to.
Right.
And so we're working really hard to build that inventory up, because the last thing we want to do is put anyone in a position where there's people out on the street, people don't have labor. We're trying to do this in a way that's everything stabilized. So be
Thank
thoughtful
you,
about
by
it.
the way, for telling me that. I was very naive. I had no idea. And that
It-
makes sense. That
It's happened, but even in that circumstance, we're trying to work with people, so.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, they should have been honest. Yeah.
the people in the task force, all of them are, county employees.
Yeah,
Okay.
so and that's,
And they're from the planning department.
there's multiple departments within that. So it's really across, it's a cross section of different disciplines. So that there's different disciplines brought to the table. We have someone from housing, we have someone from planning. Warren's there. Was there for the beginning today, but we keep it, to be clear, it's not a public meeting that takes place with the task force, and it is closed through for confidentiality purposes. So we're really trying to protect the privacy of people out there and what's happening in the field.
We have tenants, so are you going to need to go, do you guys go inside their houses? Because then we as landlords have to give advance notice.
You know, that would be a question that I would have you ask the person who's coming. So I really am not, I am trying, it's a very interesting thing for a political to be involved at all, because I'm trying to stay away from enforcement issues. I'm trying to it's not good for me to be in the middle of that. From a process standpoint, where I'm involved is trying to make sure that the way that we are approaching it is collaborative with all of the stakeholders, and that we're taking that inventory so I can go ahead and figure out at the end of the process, how do I go ahead and say, work with the county to change the codes to make it easier? Like one of the things that we're talking about is, for instance, with respect to trailers. Right now, the county doesn't allow trailers. A lot of folks have them. And so the question is, okay, if we have, and obviously it's easier to put trailers in. There's a septic issue with trailers that has to be addressed. But then there's also an ongoing inspection issue. And so one of the reasons why they didn't allow trailers in the past is because they can tend to break down faster. For me, from my standpoint, it's like, well, just increase the periodic inspection of the trailer, make it easier for people, and then we're fine. But there have been, so we're working through all of those things
Well,
right
what if
now.
wasn't there a few years ago, there was still the farm labor housing loans from the county, and those were for trailers, weren't they?
We have,
Mobile
no,
homes.
and we still have that program. We still have the farm
Okay.
labor housing loans. But one of the things we're doing there is we're assessing that as well, because we've had circumstances through this storm period. I had people reach out and they said, look, my lease on my land isn't long enough to qualify for a loan, but I actually want to improve the housing. So how do we accomplish this?
Okay.
All of those things, basically, we're creating an inventory of all of that. And we're saying, how do we go ahead and approach this in a way that's going to stabilize it long term? And then allow us to actually grow it. The objective at the end of this is to figure out how to bring ag back stronger.
Okay, this is one, I think it's great that you're serving hands on. I think it's fantastic.
Well, I
Thank you
appreciate,
for
well, I appreciate, I gotta tell you, and I was just telling everybody today in the meeting, I appreciate how collaborative the industry's been. I love how collaborative all the stakeholders have been in reaching out and working with us and being open to it. We all have the same goal, and it really has been collaborative to date, and I'm very appreciative of that. And the county, I tell you, internally at the county is very focused on it being collaborative. Lauren, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just thought, as far as the inspection team who's coming out, it's building and planning, so it's code enforcement, building code, and environmental health, looking at the water systems on the property.
That's where if you have farm labor housing.
That's if you have farm labor housing, but and there might be like who comes out to your property, because you said you didn't have any, might not be the full team, sort of, so to speak. Might just be someone verifying.
You said looking at water,
Well, like septic and,
our water is controlled by the state because it's over 25 people. And we have a test pit monthly and everything.
Yeah, do you have, are you inspected by environmental health?
We are.
Yeah, okay,
Annually, yeah,
yeah,
but the water, they don't do it because we're under the guidelines of the state.
okay. Yeah, I can't speak to that directly because, you know, that's not under my jurisdiction, but, it's, if they need me, they'll have somebody that understands that.
The other thing, the other concern that I have, back to what Ray is like, remember, this is a good example that she has single family residence and no farm labor and no farm labor housing. And if they want to go.
You
on
mean seasonal workers,
Yeah, just, you don't have nobody live there.
right?
That's what farm workers that live there. Okay, and no farm work housing. So that.
When you're ready. Thanks. 2 seconds.
Just, I want to inspect a farm like that, because they're doing farm worker inspections, and there's no farm. And she said no, and they still want to go, and she had choice that she wants them to go and all that there. It's actually, I think, impeding a little bit upon the people's rights that live there. And if they knock on the door, and it's up to the residents if they want to let them in or not.
I don't know if they will knock on the door. Like
So they might just look around.
they might just look around and make sure there's no farm worker housing and just verify it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, but I understand. I mean, I have no idea. That is being really naive on my part. Then you've got people that don't and they do. So, that part, that makes sense.
it was great to see all of you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I'll be back.
Thank you.
But you know how to reach me.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone started by Carrie's announcement? Is there anyone else from the public that had a comment before we move on to committee members?
I just like to make one comment on this farm housing. I kind of disagree. I think they should go through and check us all, everybody, get it over with, because we keep getting accused of lousy housing and abusing the workers. Let's do it, get it over with, so then people know, the county knows, and it's out there. Otherwise, it's gonna come back around again, so you might as well, they're out there now, let's get it taken care of once and for all, and straighten it out. You gotta get it straightened out, let's straighten it out. And then we gotta treat the farm worker right, and now's the opportunity to step up and take care of this problem.
As long as they
Yeah,
treat the farm
they're
worker
planning
right.
to go through it with everybody.
Right.
It's a little, it's slower because I didn't want to displace a bunch of people at the
Yeah.
same time if that's what was gonna be the conclusion of the inspection, but. So,
Well,
and plus forming like the team of people, I mean, this has never been done, so this is kind of figuring out how to do it.
the reason why I asked a lot of questions, our main camp is inspected annually. And which have no problem with, we comply with. And we have one other place that only has 2 farm workers there. And like I told them, because I was worried about that they just might show up unannounced, that if anybody shows up unannounced, just tell them to call me and give them my number. That's because it's supposed to be by appointment. And I just was worried about a few things. I was at the meeting for that was that took place at the high school. All the questions that they asked and I asked them.
Yeah, so all the ones that are registered with environmental health are being inspected. And that's kind of to get the teams, so to speak, used to what they're gonna see, but you guys are used to it anyways. It seems like it's probably likely the people that aren't inspected who might run into compliance
I get that,
problems.
but,
Yeah.
but when they send a questionnaire out, let's say I have none,
Mhm.
and then they want to come anyways.
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah.
I do agree with him on the allocation of resources. I think that's kind of a, yeah, but it's a tough line. That's hopefully it works in the end, and I appreciate that the supervisor wants to help and is being so proactive here, so I appreciate that.
Rural communications, Dante, that's where we are.
Oh, yeah, the members of the public, did you have anything?
Oh, gosh, I always have something to say. The Shamrock cow is not cooperating, why I'm late, but it's in the pen, so we're eating.
Oh.
Yeah, actually, real quick, I wanted to touch on that WCB easement post property. Which Mid-Penn, is anybody from Mid-Penn here? Oh, hi there. So real quick, 20 some odd years ago, Post purchased a lot of property on the coast, some from Musée Silvestri, as we know, is the Pheasant Club. They moved some lines around, kept the house there for a while. But we've been asking for 20 some odd years at Farm Bureau and Ag Advisory, why isn't that land farm that has all those water shares? And we were told it has this Wildlife Conservation Board easement. So we put that to rest many years ago. I've always praised Mid-Penn does an unbelievable job with their presentations and mapping graphics. Great. And I think it was the first meeting in December at the school, and then later at R&R. On the map, it shows all the lands out there on the west side, but it shows 3 of the parcels that are not in the WCB easement with the house as well, where there used to be another house and some barns. Early days, Post was tearing down buildings. They stopped that, then started building, and Farmland Futures came along. So my question is, why were those 3 parcels held out of the easement? What's the acreage? And with Farmland Futures and getting everything back into ag, there's an opportunity there for a farmer rancher with water, with a house. Maybe those barns can be rebuilt. Just curious, those 3 parcels, why they were held out of this easement and why they weren't offered to a farmer or rancher all those years. Again, that I just learned here at one of Mid-Penn's presentations, earlier this year.
John, would that be covered in item 6 on the agenda?
I think it's there, maybe.
Well, they are gonna give us a presentation, so that may be a good time to have more questions asked and answered.
Then I'll go
What does the WCB stand for?
Wildlife Conservation Board.
Wildlife Conservation Board, and that was given as the reason why a handful of parcels were not going to continue to be farmed. Or
Correct. Yeah, I believe maybe whether Post sold an easement to pay for the property or they were funded early on, wherever that went down. But again, there's a really nice map that Mid-Penn has that shows WCB easement all along the coast on the west side, except for those 3 parcels up above Lake Lucerne, which is totaling quite a bit of acreage with a house where there used to be a house parallel to that house with multiple, barns as well. Early days, they were tearing stuff down up and down the coast. It was no secret, but then, this bright light and Farmland Futures, and they're opening up, farmland. And I know Mid-Penn doesn't like to take on farm ground and if it's not previously farmed. Imagine, breaking ground under Mid-Penn's ownership is why I'm bringing this up now. So just curious again, why those parcels were held back, not offered to a farmer with water. They have Lake Lucerne water shares, and what is that acreage totaling? If someone can get back to us on that, that would be great. Or now, if you know that.
Dante?
Hey, well, there we go. That's the guy with all the answers.
I don't have an answer to why, other than one's a resident. And we can bring the acreage back to you and certainly ask that question. I don't know if some of the current Post staff know, but somebody has to know why those 3 particular parcels, other than I was told the residence was held back. And at one time, there was another residence on, I believe, one of the other parcels.
Correct. So my early days, everybody was trying to stay ahead of subdivision land map acts, and that subdivision was done on paper. And as you look at, on the ground, it's running across roads, houses and everything else. It's really chopped up, very funky. But yes, I believe the 3 parcels that are outside the WCB, one has the existing house and the one behind it had the house that was torn down with the 2 barns. And that's the problem. Those were early days of Post, and the staff that's there now, I don't think too many of them were around, if any of them then. But yeah, again, with all the stuff in Farmland Futures, done some great stuff, and there's an opportunity there, for a farmer. Just wondering where that RFP is.
Yeah, and so I can get some answers back on that, there, with the exception of those 3 parcels, there is, it doesn't provide for putting those properties into irrigated farming. But it does allow for grazing in the lands, subject to a rangeland management plan approved by the Wildlife Conservation Board.
So, yeah, so all of the other parcels that are outside of the or that are in with the WCB
They're
easement.
excluded from these, yeah.
Exactly.
those three.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Again, historically, that was all farmed and grazed, and I believe Steve Galt was the last guy that ran cattle there for years, but years past, you lose infrastructure, fencing, corrals, water, big investment, no question. Yeah, thank you.
One comment on that, though. Mike, I think if posted to look back. It was quite a few years ago, but I believe they made a deal with Fish and Game on that property. They got a large grant. And put that property where you couldn't do agriculture on it anymore. They had told us at the time.
That's true, and I think Fish and Game is like they're associated with Wildlife Conservation Board. They might be like a third-party beneficiary to holding that easement. And so I can clarify the specifics on that.
Yeah.
I haven't read it recently, but I've read it enough to try to understand the restrictions. And Fish and Game or Fish and Game at the time, now Fish and Wildlife was involved in that grant, and it was significant.
Right.
Yeah.
All I got. Thank you.
All right, well, a lot of committee members have gotten a chance to kind of weigh in on the stuff that's been discussed, but item 4 is specific committee member updates and or questions to allow committee members to share news or concerns for items not on the agenda. Peter?
Yeah, I just want to say that the presentation Greg Smith gave at last meeting was really good. And it validated what I always knew and felt as far as sanitary seal. Good.
Got one or two.
Great.
Okay. Quickly, Department of Pesticide Regulation has some proposed regulations coming out. One of them that is likely important to any producer that uses a pesticide is about decontamination facilities. And so what they're gonna require, or they're proposing, is that you have a ANSI certified eye wash station at your mix and load sites and within a quarter mile of that applicator too. Well, I might be wrong on that one. There might be like more of a portable type device that would work as well. I have to look into that, but they are holding a public hearing, May 17th. To hear people's comments on it. But in the other key to this, and it might not affect us as much here because of the temperatures, but it does require a certain temperature of that water. So for people that mix and load, in the field, basically, if it's a higher temperature, it could make that water go high. So the people in the valley are pretty concerned about it. But yeah, so it could be pretty critical to how people affect people's operations. So again, there is public hearing May 17th on that one. And then DPR is upping their fine levels too, for class A and class B fines. And so that too is being proposed. That's not in effect yet, but for instance, a class A, which is the most serious, that's like if an actual hazard has occurred from the violation. So that was $700 to $5,000 per violation. It will now be $700 to $15,000. So there's really kind of bumping it up. And so that's likely to come soon. It is partially in statute already. And so now it's just the regulations that are catching up with it. And then lastly for me, I am dusting off what we're calling the Ag ID program. This is the ad hoc situation that we did for the CZU fire, trying to help our operations get into the evacuation zone during the fire to save crops. I talked about it quite a bit after the fires, but there was kind of some different legislation that was going on. And one of them did pass. It ended up being a livestock agricultural pass. And so basically upon Board of Supervisors approval, we can have a program to issue identification for livestock operators at the moment. I was trying to push to have more encompassing, to have planted agriculture included, because I just felt like here in San Mateo County, we actually saw that planted agriculture needed it. And so I was trying to like push for that, but of course, it's kind of hard, kind of going out on a limb a little bit. But so that didn't quite happen. However, there is new legislation that is pushing for the planted agriculture too, because some counties are definitely stuck with the planted agriculture, like Sonoma and Napa, because you know they have big wine industry up there, and so they were really getting hit by the fire, so they did that. So I'm dusting it off and trying to like do some community engagement about it so that we can hopefully get something moving into it. So I was thinking that I would bring it back to this agenda in case people likely might start having questions about it, so we can freely talk about it and not violate the Brown Act. So just kind of an announcement on that from me.
And I guess, I don't know, I don't want to violate the Brown Act by asking a question, but so that is the effort there is to get kind of a codified permission for a livestock operator to be able to access their land in case of an emergency.
Yeah, and then hopefully roll in the planted agriculture too. That would ideally be the case, like with the legislation that's at the state right now.
Right, and you managed to get us access, but that was kind of on an ad hoc like
Yeah,
basis.
Yeah, the-
Guaranteed.
basically it's changing the penal code a little bit to add those type of passes. They're calling it passes. I kind of wouldn't want to really call it a pass because I don't want people to think like you're just automatically let in. But yeah, so it's kind of to really put it into statute that
Gotcha.
these type of passes. But I can put it on the agenda, like, and we can talk about it at great length if we want for the next time.
That'd be good.
Okay.
Great, and then Natalie, did you
Yeah.
have a hand up?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to throw out there, you guys are probably all familiar with Prop 19 and, you know, it's been there for a little bit now. Anyway, so we've been looking into it a lot. And, one of the things, one of the attorneys we spoke to said that, he said that Farm Bureau was very beneficial in terms of having different parcels exempt as opposed to just one parcel. But the problem is a lot of the attorneys don't know a lot about it. And so I asked Jess, he's gonna find an attorney through Farm Bureau that they don't know a lot about it as it pertains to farmland and, you know, those kind of exemptions. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because when we, like the speaker we had last time, I'm just wondering if we could put something out there that have a speaker to talk about Prop 19 and what exactly are the exemptions for, you know, for farm land and, you know, and that kind of thing. I think it would be a really timely, really good speaker to have. If, you know, if it's possible, and, you know, as under the speaker. Right, well, Jeff, if you find an attorney, maybe he might be interested in speaking, yeah. So I just want to kind of throw that out there. And that's it.
Great. We want to give time for MidPen to give us a presentation. So we had minutes presented. I didn't actually get a chance to review them, but did anyone have comments on them? I think from January. That would have been from a recent meeting, so we should all. Like it would have been a relatively recent. Summer, can we approve of them without actually looking at them?
Yes.
It's up to, I guess, each individual voter's choice. If anybody wants to make a motion, or maybe nobody's able to, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to review these minutes at the next meeting. If, and then hopefully we can review more than one month's worth at that time.
Second.
So second by Jonathan. And we'll all vote on it. James,
Yes.
Natalie,
Yes.
I vote yes, Ryan, or sorry, Peter Markey,
Yeah.
Ryan Casey,
Yes.
Jonathan Winslow,
Yes.
Lauren is not here, and then that's all the voting members. So sounds like we will, I'll make sure that we actually read them before we come to the next meeting. I assume you did attach, they are attached to the documents that you made available, right? Summer?
Yes, that's correct.
Great, and then that would move us on to item 6 that we got on here because of Dante's comments at the last meeting where we thought it was an important thing to discuss, and maybe this can we can provide some information to MidPen as they're making their presentation, but we were wanting to discuss the recommendation to the county to encourage Post to provide utility/water easements on their agricultural lands associated with the Lake Lucerne Mutual Water Company before acquisitions by MidPen. And that was largely a suggestion made to, just to provide another way in which we were hopefully providing for the long-term viability of agriculture, knowing that some of that land that has access to Lake Lucerne may not continue to be in agriculture. A lot of it's not being used actively right now. And it may be easier for Post to kind of get that in the books before MidPen takes ownership. So that, for example, we might be able to get water conveyed to other more active agricultural lands. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
What we hear for years, how it's much easier for Post to do things under their ownership, and Mike's heard me before, and others on this as well. And for Post to retain all those shares all these years on lands where most of it couldn't be irrigated, which was sort of a blessing to the other shareholders, is that they're paying for this water, whether they use it or not. So that's one concern. Someday there could be some lost revenue to the system. And there's probably, still at least 1,000 acre-feet of water there when all three of those reservoirs are full, maybe more. Some might have still been in over the years, but we don't have the farming on the coast like we used to. So even during the drought, there's really not a drought there if you're part of that water system. And to retire those shares, and still while under Post ownership, if they were to grant some utility easements through that land, if that day came to, to Root Down, to BJ, to Fifth Crow, to Jacobs, to R&R and others, just to get more off the creek and just to have that in place. Yes, it's a complicated thing. Other water rights and shareholders will have to agree. It's no easy thing, but the only thing I've been saying is while under Post ownership, at least if these easements were written in some way, if that day ever came, that's where I was going with that. Just the future of ag again, because with that WCB easement, You're not gonna be irrigating out there. Hopefully a small amount of that water could stay there for stock water. There are a few springs, maybe drill a well out there, but there's a lot of good that can happen here. And my concern is, I just don't wanna, like in the past, why didn't you bring it up earlier when it was in previous ownership? So that's why I'm being so vocal now.
Barry?
I also share Dante's concern, and it's my understanding with some knowledge of this property myself, from working for the owner prior to Post, is that Post had made a concerted effort as the major stockholder, and they had a budget to operate the water system. And now that is a mutual, it has its own bylaws and everything else, and so, I mean, it's really important to understand and talk with Mid-Penn now, even today, with all their personnel here and Mike here, just to really understand what their vision is of how they're gonna operate it in order that they can truly benefit ag, much in keeping with the other item on the agenda tonight, the agricultural policies. I mean, that's the whole idea is that, that this is a concrete example about, how you can protect ag is by just ensuring that, that this water supply that has been figured out many, many decades ago, that it is viable and it can still be utilized by the farming operations that we can have out there. So now there's a budget number to this to operate that system. There's expertise. I know that Post has done it in the past. And so I think we just really want to know and hopefully that there's something that Post and Mid-Penn can work out together so that there can be this transition of knowledge and capability. And then as for the farming community, assurances that we would have viable water source out of this very large lake system, which is really unique, for the South Coast. It's a huge benefit, and hopefully we can continue to have it for agriculture.
Yeah, I guess I'd be curious to understand a little bit more about how it's currently being maintained, and one of the ways that it's still operational is that Post is actually contributing financially annually to maintain shares. And then the land operators, if they do use the water, then they pay an additional amount. Is that?
No, you pay regardless, Peter.
Yeah, Peter, you're.
We have shares, Post takes care of the lakes. And the cost that occurs for the year of taking care of the lakes are spread upon the share owners of the water shareholders. And the system starts filling it up and overseeing the freedom judges who take care of that there. And like John and I were talking like one time before, this is if Mid-Penn gets it and they retire their shares, our cost is going to double because Post owns half of the shares. And so if they're out of the equation, and if the new owner retires those, our cost goes up because it's spread upon the remainder shareholders. And so back in the day, when as you enter Pescadero, on the left-hand side, when Pardini used to farm, their cost used to spread amongst them. So when the state bought it, took that away. So then the remainder absorbed the cost. Pretty soon, it would be 1-2 farmers left, like they won't be able to pay for the cost.
Down at Bolsa as well, that piece went to the state, so.
Yeah, the one in Bolsa that's over there before Yankee Gulch that we used to farm for decades. This is that went to the state, and one time when I talked about it, and Dan Holstein was at the meeting, he said, that works at Post, you show me, I said, yeah. So I showed him, and I brought him there, showed him, and he looked it up, and he come back to me and say, I was right. And so that's taken out of this made a deal with the state, taken out in perpetuity. So that's another 20 acres that we all pay for now because that's taken out.
Right, so there's a share in the water system that needs to be paid by the the landowners and like you are up there, the post is up there also, so you're.
They're shareholders as well. They actually own more, they own over half of the shares, the majority.
Right, so they're paying for half of that, but then there's also, once the water gets distributed, you know, when the pump is running,
Well, that's a different cost.
that's a different cost.
That's a different cost.
Yeah.
That's not under Post's watch, so to speak.
Gotcha.
So that's additional cost, yes.
Right,
And then there's probably a cost for the administrative side, Post manages the systems, I don't know what that. cost is for.
Right, and their attorney to do all the water rights and the repair and the maintenance and then hiring somebody to make sure, take care of the one that Joe Musi oversees. And so, and it's not cheap.
And again, with today's variable frequency drive pumps and other stuff, it would be nothing to, move that water around. As backup, even with these RCD projects and ponds, you guys get towards the end of the year, creek's low, we're in a drought. You could then take that water, put it in that pond, redistribute. I mean, the best is you want to move it as little as possible, direct irrigate, but whatever. That's the way it was done for years. Holding pond and then there's just a lot that can happen there. Again, about an easy thing, water right back. Right now, if all that water and shoulder cares go back into the system, it's not like Peter can turn around and sell it tomorrow. Others, all it's going to do for them is their operating costs are going to go up. And a lot of water is going to be sitting out there, in those lakes that can benefit other ag operators.
so would a proposal be that, we would, not that we get to decide, but that we would encourage, Post to put into the deed of the land, the responsibility to maintain, to take ownership of, at least to some degree, what they've been doing these years that they've owned it, to allow that to continue to be accessible.
What I would say is you're dealing with some really smart groups here, Post and MedPen. At some point, just ask them to make a presentation of what their plan is. I can't imagine that they don't have a plan.
Yeah.
There it is.
John, just to mention, years ago, there was a plan similar to what Dante's talking about, but it was on, where, the nursery is now, it's for sale on Bean Hollow Road.
Okay.
There was a plan, and a matter of fact, I've got the whole book and everything, they did the study and everything, they were gonna put another dam in the home range. And then that was gonna supply agricultural north of Bean Hollow to take care of Pescador area all the way up to Cloverdale and out towards where Dante is out at Willowside Farm. That was already made a plan and ready.
Yeah.
But I think the cost of what Dante you're talking about, I understand what you're saying, but to transfer water down to Cloverdale, it would be almost cheaper to go over there and build a couple big dams. And there's some sites there in the back of that 40-acre flat where you guys are at, that you could build a couple dams to supply the water down through the Cloverdale. Then to go and do what you want to do and bring that water back. Because that water it's all been dedicated for the coast side for years, since the 30s when they built those ponds, or those dams back there. That was all for the agricultural, from where Peter is all the way to Pescador Road. That's all dedicated for all that land in there. And to get that water away from there is going to be, I think, you're gonna have a hard time, because you guys are going to want that water from that land. And if you happen to start wanting to take the water someplace else, you're going to kill an agricultural coast if there's any potential coming back.
Well, I would agree with a lot of what you said, except for all those shares and all that acres that are never going to be farmed because of that WCD easement. And then I'm sure they have the studies to show, even in the drought years, how many acre feet were left in the system. But I guess that data would be where to start and say, okay, even in the worst of times, we had, 500 acres still in the system, we'll have X amount. But you're sure you'd have to look at that.
Yeah.
I agree. And then with Trout Unlimited and these other funders that are paying for a lot of these projects, you'd obviously reach out for some of that money. And there's always a trade-off. You're going to agree not to pump out of the creek on certain months and stuff. Just,
Yeah.
and I guess again, even if this easement was put there and it sat on idle for years, just what should be done now under Post ownership before it goes to a public agency that would be a lot more complicated. even if it never goes anywhere.
Well, one thing, other thing I want to mention, maybe Mike, you could answer this, but I understand that possibly a public agency can't take over a water system. Is that true?
I think they can, we probably, as Dante's already alluded to, we bring problems to the table. We are an environmental organization, we're subject to regulatory laws and we follow them. We bring more regulatory scrutiny. We require prevailing wage. That can be a problem for making infrastructure improvements. But what I'm hearing some concerns and wanting a presentation. That just some correction. So before post audit, there was litigation over the water system. And so there were some settlements and I'm not an attorney or a water rights attorney. And Post did get involved in helping with some bylaws and other things. Post is not the majority owner. They have 35%, I think 350 of 1,000 shares. And the water runs with the land. Be identified in the court documents. All of those properties have shares associated with them. And they can't be sold to properties that were not a part of those agreements unless everybody collectively agrees to things. But I want to back off of all that. What we are committed to is we're in the process of closing on 2 segments of the property, the southern segment and the eastern and northern segment, but not the Lake Lucerne associated. Entering into an option agreement until 2025, 26 to work out various details. And that is identifying needed water infrastructure improvement for the overall system. And that's ultimately, we'd like to be able to do that with the farmer shareholders. That would better define maintenance responsibilities with the farmer shareholders. And there are easements which are either very broad or undefined. In other words, there's not legal descriptions for the dams or the waterways or things like that. There's opportunities to better define those things going forward. But that's the intention of that option for over 2 years is to be able to work with Post as a shareholder along with all the other shareholders. The district is committed through our coastal mission to continue to support irrigation of the farmer users of this, as well as the habitat it provides. It's worked well for a number of years preceding Post and with Post to do both of those things. And we are committed to continuing that. But we're working on the other closings. There's plenty of title issues on as big a property as it is and lining up the grant funding. And then over the next through 2025, 2026, we would be working on the things that are being brought up here. And so that process really hasn't started but it needs to start soon. And so I don't have the answers. Also haven't had the benefit of having conversations with the farmer, the users, shareholders collectively.
One of my concerns as a shareholder of the system is usually when a governmental entity takes charge, cost usually goes way up. And that's some concern I have.
And like I said, if certain things are under our ownership, it's prevailing wage. And so there may be things we're willing just to take on and do and commit to doing. But we haven't identified those. We've identified what some of the infrastructure needs are. Well, I'll be honest, we have really not looked at the flume because the flume is on state parks. And that's a water right held by the shareholders and the private shareholders. But I think what's good to understand is that Post is not a majority, but they have 35% and they've restricted. Their ability to use it like the other shareholders.
That's good to hear because how it was told to us before by Walter Moore that they were on the share majority unfinished. And he said, and we're gonna do what we want to do because we're majority. I'm happy to hear it.
And I think part of it is that then they sold a big piece of property to Joe Musi, which included quite a bit of shares, and that's, at one time, they were over 50.
Peter was right, that changed. Yeah.
So, in any event, it's a very complicated title situation. So a settlement and legal situation. And we haven't started, the process of talking to the people that rely on it for farming. And that's the next thing that needs to happen this summer.
One of the things too, that was a reading, you get into your presentation here, and it's opportunity to open up to the public. The concern a lot of us have as growers with food safety is protecting our water quality watershed and the public and the watershed does not. And livestock doesn't work well.
Mike, yeah, so this first and second phase, there's nothing in there that will prevent later, if these easements were to be drawn in, it's not gonna be a problem.
Oh. After when,
So you said this first purchase, the first phase, the second phase, that won't be any of the lands out there in Cloverdale, or if you were to run a pipeline up and over that ridge or wherever it might run. That was why I was bringing this up now. Let's just say, the main distribution, it flows out to Lucerne and it's distributed from there, but if you're gonna take that water on the Cloverdale, you probably pump out of Hidden Valley, and that's why I'm bringing.
well, I think if it was distributed to other than the shareholders. That it runs, if the land, their share is associated with the land ownership. All the shareholders would have to agree to that. And so that's a whole different process than what we are proposing to undertake with the existing shareholders.
Yeah,
So
no,
on
I
one
agree.
level, BJ is right, the other shareholders would have to have a lot of say in that.
I agree with,
Want to get into, in a big way, into the water business.
I agree with all of that. I guess my only thing I was saying is if, because you're a public agency, and let's just say later on, all the shareholders say, yes, great, apply for new water rights, let's bring our costs down, we're never gonna use that, there's so much water out there. From where I started this, if there was just something that needed to be written into this deal on those lands that you're about to purchase from Post, if there's some language in this agreement that later, if funding came available and all these shareholders agree and new water rights were applied for it, that you would have a utility easement versus later trying to work with a public agency. I can only imagine what that would look like, trying to run a pipeline and acquire rights. That's what I'm going.
Well, I think one of the things we are interested in is better defining, other than the kind of broad undefined easement rights that are on the property. And as that they go to the water facilities and for why those water facilities were built. And that's for irrigation. And so it's not defined, it just applies to big tracts of land.
I guess where I'll leave it is I just hate to see a day where you have this little bit of farming on the coast. You have these other farms that can't get water, and then you have, hundreds of acre feet just sitting out there, or half the system, during a drought, and there's just no access. And
So in other
Or all
words,
the
people
reasons
aren't
I-
using that water and there's other farmers that don't have access to it and it gets squandered. That's what you're kind of saying.
yes, exactly.
It's, I think already, on Bean Hollow, there are some property owners that aren't really farming, but they, they're part of that 65% that Post doesn't own, and they have an annual expense to maintain their right to use the water, but they're not actually using the water. So it's possible that someone like that, and say those landowners increase in the percentage of those holding the land up there, they might prefer to not pay that. And say someone who's actually farming down in Cloverdale might be willing to pay something to help maintain the system. If they had access to the water. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what is being suggested. And I'm sure that will come up in conversation with the shareholders. And there may be existing shareholders who may be interested in greater water rights. And those are things, we just need to go in step by step and kind of figure things out. But to your direct question, Dante, on lake concern property and the properties we're talking about, if we grant easements. And we've done grants of easements to property owners. But one of our coastal mission is to support agriculture and to continue the distribution of water for the farming. As it exists today for the shareholders as it runs to the land, but something like that would have to be, we're not going to be a shareholder if we don't buy the property, and we're not going to be a shareholder while we're in an over 2-year option on the property. And so that's something for people that aren't at the table here, and that's Post as a shareholder and the other shareholders. Whether they want to consider all that.
All right, I get it. It's just if there was new users, new water rights applied for, all the shareholders agree, yeah, let's go ahead and sell this new bylaws. It's a process, there's no question, and other funding kicked in. I would just hate to see get to that point and say, well, gosh, here's the problem is, trying to cross these lands that Mid-Penn owned that were in previous ownership. We should have did this under Post ownership, and that's where I was going with that.
And now I'm going to get into a little bit of shaky water law, but we have looked into Post still owns all the property. The way it's currently set up, they can't transfer their shares to land they already own that is farmed. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's not a problem that Mid-Penn is creating. However, I understand what you're saying. When if we become the owner, maybe it's a permanent problem that cannot be resolved. Is that a good summary?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
And then I think just what the other concept that Dante introduced was that in the past, when Post made its acquisition 20 years ago, and then I'm sure the WCB easements were, helped with the acquisition funding, which I know also that Mid-Penn seeks to, supplement their acquisition costs. And so I think there's just that fear that we do understand, and the work that you do is very important for the habitat protection, but just that we don't want to, in you seeking maybe additional funding, we don't want something similar that happened in the past to happen in this case, when it could support ag. And so I think that's really the point that is also being made, is that we know that you have a very complicated acquisition under your hand, and but this was one technical project that we had some experience in how it went before, and now just trying to bring this up, so hopefully we can work it out. And it sounds like that there are going to be meetings with the shareholders and Mid-Penn as they navigate through this too, to hopefully understand how this is all going to work in the end, and hopefully conversations with Post.
And I'll mention how an option works is if we decide not to exercise the option, we don't end up owning a lake reserve property. So, we're doing this very carefully, because this is a system that sustains agriculture on the coast. And we haven't done anything like this before, and we want to be careful and continue to support those existing uses. And if there is the ability to do other things, hopefully those are things we can have meaningful discussions about.
care of ours.
Thank you.
There is one person with their hand raised remotely. I'm not sure. It's named Natalie Fair though. So I will unmute and if it's okay, and we'll see who this might be because I thought Natalie was there. So
I think it's Steve.
It's gonna be, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
He's muted still. What number? Phone? Yeah.
mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, come back.
Is your phone there? Let's unmute it.
No, her phone. She took it. She took it.
Maybe she-
Yeah.
I guess
There she
well,
is.
I'm asking to unmute. Oh, Natalie, there's someone in the audience that has their hand raised that is named Natalie Fair.
Is it Dan?
Is that-
Oh, it's my husband on Zoom. I'm sorry. We share
Okay.
the now. If you can allow him as a public member to
Yeah.
ask. I'm sorry, thank you. I didn't go out and go to the computer.
If the person with their hand raised online, you should be able to unmute.
Hey, wake up, Dan.
I can call him, sorry.
What time's dinner?
Don't do this regularly. It's kind of-
Let me try maybe promoting them.
Hey, okay, so you're on speaker, so, if you have your hand raised, did you want to ask a question?
No, I just wanted to know if the recording could be, if I can get a link to see that recording again.
Okay, did you hear that? He wants to know if he could get a link to see that recording again.
To see what recording? I'm sorry.
The meeting.
Oh, tonight's meeting? Tonight's meeting is.
Oh, yes, yes, it'll be posted online, probably in the next day or so. I usually get the link sent to me tomorrow morning, and then we'll get it posted and I can send that out.
Okay, you got that?
Yeah, I think it's still.
Okay, thank you.
And Mike
Got it,
knows,
thanks.
you might know in the room, but full disclosure, Peninsula Farms, which owns water shares, there was an old subdivision done out there. And historically, my father farmed out there and I irrigated pumpkins out there and had a pumpkin stand and I used that water for years. And I purchased that property. It was my mom and dad's property and sold to a gentleman. He sold it back to me. And turns out that there's no water shares, but it's listed as a place of use, as Mike knows. So I'm still working through that with an attorney to see where I go and what happened and why I don't have the single share. But it's very known.
Somehow you had water rights when you were young and then they.
Well, according to the attorney before the subdivision, I guess, and they say the water rights, water shares should run with the land, but somehow in that court case, we're working through it.
You have some family members you can reach out to.
I'll sell you anything. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to it. We want to allow some time to hear from it and you presented, you prepared something.
I haven't.
Your
I think Lois is prepared to present.
your staff. Summer, can we run through the community development directors real quick?
Yeah, it's very quick. There were no new applications, no new CDXs, no projects that went to the board or the planning commission since within this past month. So the director's report is very bare. And in terms of the Ag Advisory Committee vacancies, still pending. The Supervisor Mueller's, one of Supervisor Mueller's legislative aides did update that they are working on coordinating interviews for the candidates that did apply. So hopefully that is coming very soon. And we'll have a further update at the next meeting. And that was it for the director's report.
Great, thank you. Then we would like to, I'm sorry that we haven't left too much time for you, but item number 8 is our only real, what do you call it, a regular agenda item. Presentation and discussion on Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District's draft agricultural policy. Presentation by Nick.
All right, I think that's me. Let's see, let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen. Okay, let me know, please, when you see. Okay, cool. So, yeah, so my name is Lewis Reed. I work as the rangeland ecologist and botanist with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. And I'm part of a team of folks here who've been working on developing this draft policy language that we're reviewing this evening. What I want to do tonight, I have a very short series of slides that's really just to sort of cover some of the background and set the stage for a discussion. Hopefully you all have received and had some time to review the draft policy language, because what I'd really like to do at the time that we have together is hear any questions or comments that folks have on that draft language. So here's kind of an overview. I'll start with some background here. I'll throw some slides up that have some of the main goals of the policy and just the themes of the implementation measures. The language itself is much longer than I could fit into a presentation, so hopefully you all have a draft of your own. And you know, I want to hear as much as we can in the time that we have left here, but I'll also just put out there that you know, folks have comments or questions or ideas, you know, as you walk away from this evening and reflect on this, please feel free to email me directly, and I'll put my contact information up in the presentation as well. And then the last thing I'll cover in these first slides is just our timeline for the remainder of the policy development process. So let's go ahead and jump in here. This process has been underway now for several years, and I know many of the folks in the room have been part of the development process. Overall, this has been a process of reviewing the district's existing policies related to agriculture, reviewing the range of current practices on agricultural lands that the district's involved with, and doing this to identify any areas of need or gaps in our coverage from existing policy. The process has also involved quite a bit of stakeholder input that many of you have already participated in, and all of this to identify main themes for a single agricultural policy document. We used all that input and all that review to draft a framework, which we reviewed in an earlier board meeting of the district. And now that we have that draft language, we are reaching out again to all of the stakeholders that we engaged with earlier on in the process, just to circle back around and touch base again with folks as we move forward here before finalizing the policy. So that's kind of where we are now. And the goal is to wrap up that stakeholder input later this month, so that staff has time to work on making any needed revisions to the policy language and bringing that to our board for adoption later this summer. So that's kind of the big picture overview. It's important to recognize that while the agricultural policy is its own sort of standalone guidance on how the district carries out its work with agriculture. It does fit within a broader context of all the other existing policies that the district already has established and needs to be compatible with those. And just a reminder here, putting up our mission, folks, a lot of folks throughout the district are familiar with our broader mission of protecting lands within the 3 counties that we operate in for their ecological value and for environmentally sensitive public enjoyment. But also on the coast, specifically when the district moved into coastal San Mateo County, we expanded our mission to include protecting agricultural lands and promoting viable use of agricultural land and resources. So this is just a slide to show some of the diversity of stakeholders that we've worked with in the process of developing our framework and the draft policy language that we're discussing today. And these are all the folks that we're going to be circling back around with the draft language. One thing that doesn't show here is we're also planning a round of outreach with sort of what I would call peer agency groups. So there's like other similar organizations to MidPen from elsewhere in the Bay Area that operate at this interface between agriculture and open space preservation. So just getting review from those types of folks as well, and sharing our work with them as well. So before we dive into this language, I'm actually going to skip ahead and we'll come back to this slide just as a reference point for our discussion, but I'm going to skip ahead to this timeline just to show that we're pretty far along here. This is not the entire timeline. This is actually just since about this time last year. This process has been underway for, as I mentioned, a few years now. But where we are now is, between spring and summer, or sorry, winter and summer here, wrapping up our stakeholder consultation. And as I mentioned, planning to bring the final language to the board for approval later this summer. And that'll be a public meeting that all of you can participate in. But what I'm really hoping is, beyond just our discussion here today, that folks have ideas about this or questions, to please reach out so we can try to address those proactively and be ready to bring this to the board this summer. So my contact information is at the bottom of this slide here, and I can put it back up later if folks need a little more time to look at that. I can be a point of contact, and if I can't answer your questions, I can try to find you somebody who can. But let's go ahead and put this slide up as a reference point for our discussion. This slide just has the 3 overarching goals of the agricultural policy, and then the specific list of areas that the implementation measures cover for the agricultural policy. So we can just use this as a reference for a discussion. That's all of my background presentation. What I'd like to do now is just open up for questions, comments, and discussion. Do folks have any questions or comments so far on any of these? Are there any particular areas within this that folks would like to focus on while we're here meeting together?
Yeah, Peter has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see. I need somebody to help me.
Okay.
Yeah, before the
You
meeting.
guys are like this big right now.
And Chair Vars, there are a few online hands as well when you're ready.
Great.
Just let me know.
Before the meeting, I was going over it a little bit, and one of the things that it said was, when you guys were able to obtain the property to open up for public access. And that bothers me because I'm concerned of the watershed for the water for irrigation and with complying with food safety. our water has to be in a certain quality and that we test, I think it's quarterly for our food safety program. And years ago, we never heard of E. coli. Now it's out there and we don't need anything in our watershed that could harm our quality of water for our irrigation. And public access is it's just not good.
Great, that's it. Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm just going to try to take some notes, and I've got a couple of my colleagues here as well helping me take notes to capture comments like that. But thank you, Peter.
And can I jump in here, Louis, real quick?
Please do.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brandon Stewart. I'm the Land and Facilities Manager for Mid-Penn. I'd also like to recognize one of our board members who's in attendance, Margaret McNiven. She's representing the board tonight, so we much appreciate her attendance as well. You know, speaking of, Peter, were you talking specifically Cloverdale?
The watershed that I was talking to up the Lake Lucerne Hidden Valley.
So public access is part of our mission. However, that property is very, very unique. And so what we're going to be doing on the interim basis is only allowing docent-led tours and very limited public access via a permit system. So although that there will be public access, it will be very tightly monitored and it will be constrained and led by Mid-Penn docents. And that will just be for quite some time until a long-term public access plan has been developed. And that goes through a very substantial and lengthy planning process, which we wouldn't foresee happening for quite some time. But in the meantime, those activities will be strictly limited to permit access and docent-led activities. So you won't have just random people walking out there through the property.
Thank you. We had a, go ahead, James.
So going back to that topic though, I mean, let's say there is a group of people with a docent and the docent is not looking or something and someone goes and contaminates the water. I mean, who's going to be responsible?
So someone that goes on a tour that's led by a docent goes out there and contaminates the
water. I mean, I don't know. It just, to me, it's kind of scary for it to just be written that way in the general policy.
Mm-hmm.
I would like there to be a little bit more detail about it.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I'll add that to the discussion that we bring back to the ad hoc community.
Hey, I'm sorry, I don't.
James. Yeah, I'll just echo that too. This is good document that's specifically tailored to agricultural, but in terms of the public access, it's very light. And if we are kind of looking at the policies in general, having information about the public access, what is the policy, is your guiding principles, I think would be extremely helpful to balance it against what the agricultural side is. And then there was also a mention that Louis had about, you know, compatibility with other guidelines. We have a really great LCP document, and the California Coastal Commission has done a fantastic job listing out all the different things that are permitted and not permitted on different land. What is your policy with regards to LCP support and compatibility? If something is permitted in the LCP, does that automatically mean that you are going to support it and encourage it as well? Because I don't see that really clearly defined, and I think it would be a great thing to have, because those policies are a public document and it's really helpful. We want to make sure that the public understands what the guidelines are and that can refer to those documents as well. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, we'll look into that. Thank you for that comment.
Carrie?
Thank you, Louis, for your presentation. I do have written comments I'll be submitting. And I do believe that the Cloverdale acquisition, it's a great way as a, to test the policies and maybe provide some comments in that regard, but we've talked about that already. On ag policy, AG2, I would really hope that you could evaluate the compatibility of low intensity public access on non-prime soils and really try to make sure that the prime soils are protected to the largest extent, and that infrastructure for low intensity recreational use be obviously focused on non-prime, non-productive land. And then also, you have a policy AG3A about regional agricultural workforce. Well, we talked about this earlier tonight, and I think that there's truly a local need for our farm workers, and so I'm not so sure whether, given how sensitive our habitats are and because environmental concerns are so strong, I think you might want to tailor that for our local needs rather than regional needs, given our resources are so scarce here. And just in general, there was a talk about encouraging the viable agricultural use of land and everything, and I just don't know if the policies themselves define that. I know that's a difficult thing to do, is to define viable ag, but I think a little bit more effort needs to be flushed out for Mid-Penn so we can understand what your overall thinking is on what constitutes viable agriculture. And just there has obviously been some concern about the subdivision exemption that Mid-Penn and that benefits some of the Mid-Penn programs, and I think that's what's so key about making sure that these ag policies, since we don't no longer through that subdivision provision, there's no easements to ensure continued agriculture on these parcels. We really want to work and understand that your policies will have some more assurances built in so that we could have some level of protection, since that one is now no longer available to the land. So in a nutshell, those are some of my comments.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kara, let me just follow up. I want to make sure I understand each of those points. For the AG3 on how the regional versus local housing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that, I think in the policy, when we're talking about regional housing, I think we do mean pretty localized. We're just distinguishing housing that is associated with a particular agricultural lease versus housing that generally supports people who work in the agricultural community. Does that make sense? When I say regional housing, so I don't mean necessarily broader spatial extent other than beyond a particular agricultural lease.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I just read it, I mean, I'm not being the author of the policy, but yeah, it just consider opportunities to partner with and support local organizations that provide affordable regional agricultural workforce and housing when such partnerships. So yeah, I can see how, yeah, that you're talking more about the partnerships in a regional way, but I guess I just want to make sure that we're concentrating on providing, local housing for our local force. I mean, part of our preserving our area here is also not to increase any kind of traffic or other types of impacts that would happen. So yeah, I can see that could be more just like you're looking at the partnerships rather than the actual housing, for people.
Yep.
So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, as Mike mentioned earlier, as a government agency, we come with a lot of regulations, restrictions, and challenges. Prevailing wage is a big one for us. And also we're not really great at developing housing, but we are working towards developing partnerships and helping other folks that are in this arena with their projects. Earlier in the conversation this evening, there was discussion about a possible farm labor housing development. That's a perfect opportunity for Mid-Penn to enact this portion of the policy to partner and provide assistance to support projects like those. That's where we mean that's where we're going with it in this policy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you want to go first? Go ahead. In looking at your timeline in terms of adoption of the plan and everything, and you had a couple of meetings and you have one in the summer, then I noticed the one you're having in the summer, it's then going to go to, yeah, this one here, goes to stakeholder consultation, and then board consideration for the summer 2023. I'm assuming you're under the Brown Act, so you only have to like post your agenda and this development time, the policy development 3 days. Is it possible for you to send the document that's going to go to the board to this group earlier, let's say 10 days ahead of time? You know, just so that they can review it, because there's a lot of important stuff that's going to have a direct impact on this group: water, housing, public access, all of that, so that you can give them a chance to review it. You know, don't have 3 days to review it. They give them 10 days or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that, yeah, the draft that will be reviewed by the board will be ready whenever we sort of get our board packet together for the board. But I do think it's reasonable that we would send a revised draft out prior to that meeting. Yeah, could you send me that? Could you send me that request in writing? Could you see my email here? Can you just send me a note about that?
All right, I will.
Yeah, no, we want to get to, there's still folks with their hands up online, Summer, but Dante had a comment.
Yeah, on the public access part of it. And then what's the plan to educate, you know, people outside the Pescadero area, the Bay Area, the public? We're already inundated there on the coast side, no parking, bathrooms, garbage, and it already went public. I think they called this the Cloverdale Park. So all these people are gonna end up out there and really, it's not open to the public. So, you know, what's the plan to educate them? That you said several years out, is that 5 years, 10 years? Or how many years before you get, you know, your parking, bathrooms, garbage and trails? But again, meanwhile, the people, I'm a taxpayer, there's 4,000 or 5,000 acres, whatever it's gonna be. People are gonna show up. I know you're gonna have rangers out there, but we are already gridlocked, that little unincorporated town, and this is gonna have further impact on that. So what's the plan there?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point, Dante. And so just to reiterate that the policy is not just for Cloverdale. This is sort of how Mid-Penn interfaces and carries out our work with agriculture throughout the district, which is mostly coastal San Mateo County. And there is a component of the policy that specifically calls out the need for providing education to promote awareness and appreciation around the importance of local agriculture. So that's specifically called out in here. Sorry, I was just scrambling to flip through as you were speaking to find it in here. I'm trying to see which, actually, let's go back up here, because I bet you there's a heading for it. It's probably under AG 6. Sorry, I've been bouncing back and forth between all of these quite a bit. Yeah, so AG6 provides some guidance on that, but specifically calls out, providing education to promote, awareness of the importance of local food production and also some of the other benefits that come with keeping agricultural lands in production and as agricultural lands. We do some of this work already. Just last week, I met with a school group out at the La Honda Creek Preserve to talk about our conservation grazing program and sort of the importance of that to the agricultural community, but also how that plays into our stewardship of the unique resources out there. So we do some of that work already, but there is a specific element of this policy that says we should be pursuing that, as part of our work.
So we'll look forward to seeing signage out there as well, all around town, whatever that's gonna look like someday. It's gonna say, Mid-Penn, Clover Hill Park or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah, James.
So I had another question. In the background, it says the district considers viable agriculture use of land resources to those agricultural activities that do not exceed the capacity of supporting resources. I was just kind of curious about supporting resources. Is that specifically referring to resources as they are existing? Or can it be expanded upon to like potential resources? If the land could obtain additional water rights, would it consider that viable agriculture?
Yeah, that's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that way. I think that the thrust of that statement is, things like, not using the land in a way that renders it like less productive in the future, right? So trying to maintain the underlying resource base in a way that's more sustainable, right?
Well, I'd like to hope that they could see if they could put in a little bit more, that they could bring more land into production. And to have that kind of forward thinking of it can be improved upon.
Okay, thank you.
I would assume this does not require a CEQA, but can you put stuff in there like, for instance, in another life, I was on a traffic organization for the Bay Area. And when they measured the traffic in Pacifica, we were at Wednesday was like sea level. And we had to push, Half Moon Bay and Pacifica pushed to get that measured on weekends. And that immediately brought us down to level service F. And I think it would behoove the farmers here if you had some sort of baseline traffic study of what is there now, for at some point, you might want, there needs to be some sort of mitigation of that traffic. And you're also, a lot of housing, I don't know how many units you're considering, but a lot of that is required under CEQA and stuff. And I don't know, I imagine Summer, is this going to be exempt from CEQA, a negative declaration?
It's not going through the county. It'll go through their Mid-Penn's board. Mid-Penn may be able to speak more on in terms of
Does Mid-Penn,
whether they'll be doing.
do they get to declare it as a negative declaration?
Well, Mid-Penn as a public agency can act as lead agency and do oftentimes for their projects.
Okay, so I think it would behoove the group here if there was a traffic study. So you have a base point down the road of how to eliminate, the vehicle miles traveled. Do you need to have buses or something to come to the park?
So I can speak to that, Louis, with my limited knowledge of CEQA, but because when we have a specific project identified along the coast, such as a parking lot, as you just mentioned, then yes, CEQA would be necessary and all parking feasibility studies would be required as a result of that impact. So that's where CEQA would be triggered, is when we have an actual project associated along the coast. However, this policy just outlines partnership opportunities and the direction for staff to engage in conversations to execute those types of partnerships or execute those types of projects. So for this particular policy that we're talking about today, there's not CEQA that's involved with it because there's not a specific project that it relates to. But should there be projects along the coast that promote or that we would partner with to develop agricultural housing or to develop a parking area or an observation outlook point, something along those lines where there is an impact to the environment, then yes, of course, CEQA would be engaged in.
Are you okay? It's okay with that?
Well, the impacts the purchase. I mean, people are
I'm
gonna.
not sure that.
Well,
Right.
you're changing the use of this land from what it is now to a higher intensity use with public access through marketing, promotion,
Yeah.
possibly some housing, which is again, and I just think maybe not a full sequel. I can understand where you're coming from there. But I do think that you need to have some measurement of what the impacts are as is today versus what it might be in 5 years or 10 years. That, okay, we need this parking lot now, 5 years down the road, because traffic has increased 35% or 40%. I just think it's up to these guys to fight.
Well, Peter, if you can be brief, because there's people waiting to make comment in the public that haven't had a chance to speak.
You want them to go first?
Well, just in the
Brief.
I
I know on the parking lot of the cow ranch. I don't know what study you guys did, but any weekend on a warm day, this is their parking on Highway 1 and turning Highway 1 into a raging storm. So I hope we can learn from that too. This one here, we do a lot better.
Yeah, there were major issues about that we actually had to address at the AAC meeting regarding the traffic on Highway 1. And it was being horrific, and especially, for emergency access on Cloverdale. This could be an issue.
Summer, are there folks that you see there that still have their hands up that might want to comment?
Yes, there are.
We're approaching the time when we would be adjourning the meeting, so I just would ask whoever, we'd love to hear from you, but we'd like you to keep your comments brief if possible.
Summer, real quick, we do have Jane Mark, who is our planning manager, who could speak more to CEQA because her department manages CEQA for the district. Would you mind if she was allowed to give just a brief comment about CEQA concerns?
8 o'clock to the next one.
Chair Vars, I'll get that
Yes,
back to you.
that'd be fine.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jane Mark. I'm Mid-Penn Planning Manager. Thanks for promoting me to panelist. I was raising my hand. So there are two things what I'm hearing tonight. One is CEQA review for the actual ag policy, which is being discussed with you all tonight. So before the Mid-Penn Board of Directors could make any final action to approve this policy document, staff will be conducting CEQA review of the policy just to ensure that it meets the California Environmental Quality Act. Now, I have to agree with my colleague, Brandon Stewart, that the policy is a very high-level document. It's really defining our targets or what our goals to achieve with the agricultural use program. So we are not specifying any particular project that we're actually going to go build. So for example, goal number 1, preserve agricultural operations, and AG-3, agricultural housing. These are some of the goals and principles that we'd like to achieve with for supporting agricultural housing. We're not actually specifying sites to build housing as part of this policy. Those are going to be more future on down the road in terms of specific projects that will come about And at that point, if we do identify a site for agricultural housing on Mid-Penn lands, Mid-Penn is a public agency, so we are the lead agency to conduct environmental review for that specific project. So I hope that answers the questions in terms of the specifics associated with implementing this policy in the future. Now, related to future public access plans for Cloverdale Ranch, as my colleague Brandon mentioned, we don't have long-term plans developed for public access yet. We're definitely going to look at that in the future, but it's not something we'll have available in the next few years. So any long-term uses for low intensity recreational uses, trails, trailheads, future parking areas, those are going to require CEQA review. And I don't recall the gentleman's name about doing baseline traffic studies. Yes, that would be required at that time when we actually have a proposed project that we will be conducting CEQA review. So absent of a long-term use plan for public recreation and public access, we don't have actually something that we can evaluate for CEQA review at this time. Hopefully this helps clarify the distinction between the two things that we're talking about, the ag policy and future long-term use plan for Cloverdale Ranch and CEQA review. Thank you.
Thank you. Summer, let's go ahead and allow just a couple other comments if there are folks there. It is 8:05.
Yes, we have, I think it's Daniel Sayre, and then Rob Skinner, the two hands raised. So Daniel, if you can unmute yourself, you should be able to speak. I'm not sure.
Summer, I'm calling in right now.
Okay, should I move on to Rob Skinner?
He's just
Or-
still, yeah.
Yeah, you may still just have his hand up from before. Yeah, let's hear from Rob.
Are you, you don't need to talk? Okay, fine. He's not.
Okay, Rob, if you can unmute yourself and go ahead and speak.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, just a couple of quick things. Louis, on your slide, you have the PMAC down as a committee, and technically it's a council. So it's Pescadero Advisory Council. Yeah,
I see
so
on
you
the
can make a change.
stakeholder side.
So,
Yeah.
if you could correct that for us, that'd be great. I want to reiterate what Dante brought up. We have all of 2 trash cans in Pescadero. That's needless to say, they're full all the time. So it's an expense that, you know, is incurred. Well, actually, the expense is paid for right now, but and I expect that you guys will be bringing in a great amount of traffic. So it might be worthy. It might work if you guys had an interpretive center somewhere, so people could see here's where you are, here's the trails, here's the parking, that sort of thing, a bulletin board of some sort. And then lastly, I don't know if it's possible for the stakeholders for the irrigation water, but has anyone tested that water? Is it something you can sell, or is that permitted?
Water's tested a lot.
Water's tested a lot.
But is it potential? Could it potentially be potable?
It can be.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's an asset. And at the time, there's plenty of people, plenty of communities that need water. I don't know if this year would be applicable, but certainly some of the water districts like La Honda, CSA 7 and Memorial Park and others, you've got quite an asset there, and you may want to consider that as a possibility.
It's not allowed to be transferred offsite.
That's what I'm wondering, if it could be transferred into a tanker, for example, can it be used for fire suppression?
Yeah, I think in an emergency, yeah, but I think its intention is to be used as agricultural irrigation water. And so it may be difficult to allocate it to other uses.
Okay, I'm just curious. Thank you very much. That's all I've got, Summer.
That's the last of the speakers online.
Okay, well, I think this is great. Thank you, Midpen, for the presentation. Hopefully all the members can review the policy language with a little bit more care and get some comments back to you, additional comments if they wish to. And we appreciate you taking the time to come and speak with us.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing the meeting with us and giving us an opportunity to meet with you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, well, and with that, I will,
Really super fast.
Yeah,
I just have a
please.
question. Can you tell me what the acronym, I apologize, but what the CEQA is an acronym for?
California Environmental Quality Act.
Environmental Quality Act. Okay, thank you very much.
all right, thanks everyone for coming. With that, we'll adjourn this evening's meeting.